What are the things to look for when you go to a nursery and buy material for bonsai? That is what I'll explore in this video, and today I'm using this example of an Aeonimus. Growing bonsai means sourcing material. Where do you get your bonsai material and how do you select it? Well, there's a couple of routes that you can get bonsai material, and I'm going to deal just with one. I'm not going to deal with self-propagation, collecting from the wild, collecting from gardens. No, I'm going to go to a nursery. In fact, I went to a nursery. Now, going to a nursery has a few benefits, and you really should take those. You have plants that are already established in a pot, so they have a compact root system that you can quite easily reduce. Typically, they're very healthy. Those are the two main reasons why I would go to a nursery. And of course, it is legal and you have a lot of varieties and you can decide yourself what you are looking for and what you're going to pick. So if you go to a nursery, keep those things in mind. A downside of collecting yourself would be it takes a long time for them to establish. You don't have a choice often of species. It's just depending on what you can get. From seed, it takes a very long time to develop into a big size. And in a nursery, you can straight away buy something at a big size. So those sort of choices determine why you'd go to a nursery for a plant, why you collect, or why you grow from seed or cutting. That also means that if you go to a nursery, you typically should avoid plants that are too small to be used, that need years to grow out, unless it's a very special variety and you've been on the lookout for that. You should avoid plants that are mostly unhealthy. And yeah, look for plants that have something interesting. Don't look for a straight trunked tree that you need to have massive chops on and that need years to heal. Keeping those things in mind, let's delve a little bit deeper into what to look for when you're buying plants at a nursery. This plant I got at the nursery sellout. It is the end of the growing season. Slowly but surely the nurseries are switching out their stock. So that is answering your first question. When should you go to a nursery to find stock for bonsai? Well, quite simply said, the best deals are had at the end of the season. The nurseries are closing down. Christmas season might be coming up. They want to clear large parts of the nursery. So they look at the stock that hasn't been sold. They see whether they can return it to the trader or they just discount it by 50% perhaps. And the best part of it is that at the end of the season, the stock that hasn't sold is typically the sort of material that we want for bonsai, but nobody else wants in their garden. You're looking at plants with multiple trunks, with lots of low branching, with long whips, died off sections. Basically, plants with character. Now, what should you look for when you go to a nursery and buy bonsai stock? Now, there's not one clear answer here. To be honest, if I go to a nursery, I go there open-minded and I just look, what do they have? I, of course, already have a good idea of what plants I like for bonsai and what I have at home and what I might want to add. This, for instance, is an Aeonimus. An Aeonimus, it is a firebush. I have a firebush, but not this one. This is Aeonimus alata, and I think I saw already, yeah, here, it gets really, really nice red foliage in fall. The one that I have is the European one, and they just go buttery yellow and then fall off. No fall show at all. So I have been on the lookout for one of these with a decent sized trunk for a while now. So that's the first selection criteria for me. What species am I interested in? Species that work well for bonsai, but also species that I don't have yet. And at a regular nursery you can come across things like Aeonimus, but also Japanese maple or larches or olives. There's lots and lots of different plants to get. Then the second thing that I look for when I'm looking for plant material is, are the plants of that variety and that species grafted or not? I don't like grafted plants, so I always look at the base of the tree and I see there's a first root here and there's clearly no distortions here in the bark. So this tree, this has not been grafted at all. So this for me is a good plant. And normally when you go to a nursery and you see a whole batch of trees and one of them is not grafted, then none of them are grafted. And the other way around. If one is grafted, you can bet on it that all of them are grafted. Now, why don't I like grafted trees?
That is actually quite simple. I want a bark to be continuously elegant. I don't want differences in thickness. Grafted trees typically have differences in thickness after a couple of years, and the bark doesn't develop in the same way. So at a certain point you just see the contrast between the rootstock and the grafted top. You can of course layer them off, but it is adding another year or two. But if you're in a pinch and you can't find the species or variety that you want ungrafted, check and see whether they air layer well, and then you can always layer them off. Next, I look at the general health of a tree. I have so-called green fingers, so most plants will recover when I buy them, but they need to be seriously discounted before I buy trees that are infected by other insects, that have massive parts of dieback that are inexplicable, that have no leaves. Basically, I want a tree that still looks healthy and fit at the end of the season. Like this one, you can see there's lots and lots of foliage, but you can see why a nursery would discount them. A lot of leaves have come off already. It is really going into dormancy now. And that even though we're just hitting September right now. Then, one of the most important things, the size. How big is the plant that you buy? You can grow out a lot of plants, don't get me wrong. But if I want a tree with a trunk as fat as my wrist, then you don't start off with small plants like these. These are typically the size that you get. And otherwise they are really, really big with very fat and straight trunks. Straight trunks is another selection criteria of mine. Normally for bonsai we don't like straight trunks. There are only two styles of bonsai that favor a straight trunk, and only one of them can be used when you go for nursery trees. Typically the formal upright bonsai has a straight trunk, but it needs to be elegantly tapered without big jumps. And the only way to do that is over the years to let it grow out, cut it back, let it grow out, cut it back, let it grow out, cut it back. You know the drift. So if you go for a nursery plant this fat and you cut it back to 10 centimeters, 4 inches, then it will take you a decade or more to create a nice elegantly tapering formal upright trunk. So buying a straight trunk is not suitable for that. However, the formal broom has a massive fat trunk. It needs to have very nice elegant root system, but it is typically created by cutting off a big tree and letting side sprouts branch out into the broom shape. And there actually a nursery tree with a very fat straight trunk is perfectly fine. But for most trees, nah. And that's also what you can see here with this Aeonimus. This is actually a twin trunk, and the trunk has lots of branches, and this one has nice movement. Keep in mind, size-wise, this is a very large shrub. It has good base here, but in the end the tree is probably going to be this size, not much more. So everything else is going to be cut off. And in fact, that is something for another video, and I will make that video. How do you then deal with this tree? The one thing that is really important in bonsai, and that I did not mention so far, is the nebari, the root spread. And there is a very good reason for it. If you go to a nursery and you buy plants there, typically these are grown first as a young plant in a small pot and potted in ever bigger pots. And as a result, very often, here I have a root at the surface, but it could very well be that the true nebari is actually hidden under 1 or 2 inches of dirt. And although you can start digging in the pots, most nurseries don't like it. So that's a little bit of a gamble. You have to have a bit of luck. And of course you can with your fingers go in the pot and move the dirt around a little bit. But really checking for nebari is very difficult when you are at a nursery. I guess that covers it all, right? You look for a species that you like or want in your collection. You make sure that it is a plant that is not grafted. You make sure it is nice and thick and healthy. Then ideally it has some interesting shape, and if possible you look at the nebari. Those are the key things that I look for when I go to a nursery and select a bonsai tree. One tip before you start pruning: always look in the tree whether there's branches that you feel like, hey, that could also make an interesting bonsai. And actually that's also something you can already do in the nursery, where you say, I don't like the base, but on top there's a very nice interesting part, and I can layer that off and make that into my bonsai, and the rest I just plant in the garden, I chop back and grow out again, or do something else. Well, if you're just beginning with bonsai,
and a lot of this was new to you, have a look at this video. It might give you a good start in growing bonsai more effectively and faster. Anyway, this was Jelle with a short video on what to look out for when you select nursery stock. Keep growing bonsai. See you next time.